In this lecture, we're going to be finishing up our landscape painting. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the background. So we're going to start with the sky. So down here in our sky folder, we have our sky layer. We can paint directly onto that layer if we want, or if we want, we can add a new layer above it to paint our clouds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select one of these cloud colors, one of the darker colors. So we don't want to pick this really light color yet. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a different brush. Let's grab something with some texture in it, something that we can kind of create these wispy effects with. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my brush size up, and I'm just going to paint back and forth like this. And it might take you a few tries trying to find the right brush for this. So I'm going to try a few other brushes. Let's see. And you don't have to use a brush exactly like mine. If you don't have the same pack that I'm using, you might have different brushes. There's all different ways you can do this, so just experiment with different brushes or look for something similar that I have. I think I'll just stick with the watercolor one. Undo all these. And I'm just going to basically paint across my canvas like this and just get these nice wispy looks. Just like that. And if it doesn't match the clouds exactly in our photograph, that's fine. We don't need it to look exactly the same. I'm going to go ahead and select this blue up here. It's a little bit darker and a little bit less saturated, I think. Whoops. Paint some of that in. I'm going to reselect this cloud color out here and go ahead and just fill this in. Alright, great. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my smudge tool, and I'll just use that to kind of smudge. Whoops. Let's give that a second. I'm going to go ahead and change my strength and bring it down a little bit so it's not smudging so much. Actually, maybe I'll use an effects brush. So I'm going to come up here to my effects brushes. I'm going to use something like, let's see, special effects brushes. I'm going to come into something like Kyle's concept brushes. And this is going to give me some nice smooth mixing, which is what I want. I want that background to be kind of blurry a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and select some of this color up here, some of this darker gray color. Switch back to my watercolor brush. I'm just going to paint a little bit more of that in over here. Go ahead and select this color and paint some more of these clouds kind of wisping across here. Oh, let's switch to the brush tool. So I just basically want to get this idea that these clouds are kind of wisping across the sky. They don't have to look super fancy or anything like that. I think that looks pretty good. I'm also going to go in there and I'm going to find a cloud brush. So if you don't have a cloud brush, I recommend that you go and you find a brush pack that has some cloud brushes or some smoke or something like that. And I'm going to look for forest fog. I like that one. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint a little bit of this in. You can see it just gives a really nice, realistic looking cloud effect. I'm going to go ahead and select this white in the clouds right there. I'm going to paint in some few bright clouds out here, right about where you see it in the photo. Something like that. You can see with very minimal work, it already creates pretty realistic looking clouds in the sky. Alright, great. I think that's looking pretty good. next, let's go ahead and move on to our next layer. So I'm going to go ahead and close that folder, and I'm going to open up the Mountain 1 folder, which is this layer right there. I'm going to go ahead and erase that. Got a little black or little blue thing out there in the sky. And what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to right click and create a clipping layer mask. So however you need to create a clipping layer mask in your software, go ahead and do that. So that way we can paint within here and it won't go outside of it. I'm going to go ahead and grab a soft edge brush. So something like this. And then what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color pick the dark shadow areas over here. So I'm going to pick something like that. Bring up my brush size. I just kind of want to fill it in right over here. It'll slowly fade into the other color. Maybe I can select some of this color right there. So this background area is just going to basically be shadow colors. Let's go ahead and select that color, paint it down here. Looking for the darkest colors I can find. I think if we can lighten this area up actually a little bit, because it seems that everywhere I'm color picking it's pretty dark, so I'll probably just keep that pretty dark out there. Alright, great. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color pick some of these the lighter colors out here, some of these highlights in the mountains, and I'm going to grab a tapered brush, so something like that, so I can create these nice fat, thick, and thin lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer, bring it above that layer so it automatically creates a clipping layer mask over here in my layer tray. And then using my brush tool, I can just start brushing in some of that stuff. So I'm seeing that right down here. We kind of got this surface up here above the mountain. We also have some stuff over here, so I'm going to go ahead and color select some of that. As you can see, I'm not getting super detailed with it. I'm just kind of almost sketching in some of these highlights that I see in there. We're going to kind of clean these up a little bit, make them look a little bit better, but a lot of painting landscapes, especially when you're doing just studies or concept art or stuff like that, a lot of it is just going to be kind of suggesting things to the viewer's eye to make them think they're looking at snow or Rocky Mountains or something like that. Select some of this. Just keep this nice and simple. Don't overwork it. Just sketch that in nice and messy because it's rocks. It'll look good in the end. So don't worry too much about it. I'm gonna go ahead and select this color out here. Select some of this stuff, shade that in. Something like that is looking good. Alright, then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to grab something like, let's come into my brush tips. We're looking for something that has a decent amount of texture, so maybe something like this. See how that looks. Whoops. Let's switch to our eraser. We want to be on our eraser tool. See how this looks if we were to erase with it. Maybe if we were to change the spacing like that. And you can see that we can kind of erase out some texture there. Let's try a few other brushes, see how we like them. Maybe that one. So that kind of can erase out some spots and add a little bit of texture to that. Let's see what else we have. Try something like this. Alright, so we can kind of use that to erase out some of this texture and kind of give us something a little bit more interesting looking. I'm going to space it out a little bit more like that. And then we can grab something else. Let's just grab something like anything with a little bit of texture, and we can go in there and kind of just erase some of these shapes out a little bit more to shape them out, kind of like we did with the profile of the mountains. But we're just looking to get a little bit more definition, form, and texture in there. So it doesn't look like a bunch of paintbrush strokes. We want it to look a little bit more organic and jagged. I'm going to paint in with just a little bit of this darker color and kind of darken all this up a little bit. I think it's a little bit too bright. Alright, and then we could try bringing the opacity down on this layer, see how that looks. Probably don't want to bring it down too much, but maybe just a slight bit. Alright, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and erase this out just to sharpen that up a little bit more. Maybe we could take some of this color as well. Paint it up here at the top of this mountain. Alright, great. Now let's go ahead and let's work on the snow. So I'm going to add a new layer underneath that one, but drag it above it because that will automatically turn it into a clipping layer mask in Photoshop. And so the snow works basically the same way. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead, I'm going to select this darker snow color up here, and I basically just want to fill in anywhere where the snow is going to be. So it basically is right there in that big general area. Oh, sorry you couldn't see me draw that, but it's basically going to be right across here. And maybe a little bit further down like that. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take this lighter white color on the mountain, and then let's grab some sort of a softer brush, so maybe like this watercolor brush again, and I'm going to paint in some of these highlights that we see on the mountain. So we kind of see it right there, and what they are is I think it's just light kind of coming between or through the sky, through the clouds I mean, sorry. So we only want to add this bright color anywhere we see the bright snow on the mountain. All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and take this blue, and I'm just going to kind of reshape some of this because some of the areas need to be a little bit thinner. Just kind of like that. Remember that we're painting in a layer mask, so we can paint outside of the shape of the mountain. We don't really have to worry about that. We can also kind of blend some of this if we want, kind of soften up some of this. All right, great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start erasing out the shape of our snow. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go ahead and create that layer mask on the actual layer. So this is a layer mask for that layer. And what it allows us to do is if we're painting with black, or if we paint with white, let's switch to white, you can see that it erases it out. And then if we paint with black, it paints it back in. And that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and switch to white. And then I'm going to switch over to a brush. Let's grab something that has a taper and a hard edge. And we just kind of want to erase everything out on this mountain the way we see it up in our photo. Every little detail doesn't have to be the same, but the closer you can get it, the better. Alright, great. So now we have kind of the impression of some snow on the mountain. We need to make it look much more realistic. But one thing that you can do is now if you want, you can switch back to black and you can kind of reshape some of this stuff out if you need to. So if somewhere you made a mistake and you want to add some more snow back in, if you paint in with the black while you have your layer mask selected, then you can go ahead and kind of add some of that back in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of snow back in there in some areas, especially little dots and stuff like that up here. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to my eraser tool. And I want to grab some stuff with some texture that I can erase out with. So we can experiment with a few different things and find what it is that we like. That looks kind of cool. Let's see what this guy looks like if we erase out with him. And I need to make sure I switch back to my actual layer to erase that out. And let's go ahead and try erasing some of this out. And you can see it just starts to almost organify the image. Makes it look a little bit more like powdery snow off in the distance. It just adds that layer of texture that we need. Alright, that's looking pretty good. We could even come down to this layer down here and use this to add a little bit more texture. Alright, great. Alright, so that's looking pretty dang good. We could also add a texture layer in here. I'm going to drag that underneath and back above so it becomes an automatic clipping layer mask. And then I could grab a brush, something like a speckle brush. I can speckle in some texture in there. Maybe I'll use some dark texture. That. And maybe I could also, I'm going to bring the opacity down on those speckles. And I could also probably create a new layer and fill it in with, let's say, this sky color. So I'm going to select this blue sky color back here. It's kind of a gray color. Fill that in. And what I can do is I can bring down the opacity on that, and I can just kind of control the lightness of those mountains, because maybe they look a little bit too dark to you. So I could brighten those up a little bit if I wanted. I think somewhere right about there probably looks good. We can also try things like smudging some of this detail. So maybe on the rocky part of it, I can come in and use something like this concept brush that kind of smudges the paint, and I can just kind of smudge that a little bit. Anyways, alright, I think that's looking good for a background layer. So again, this is just a study, so it doesn't have to look perfect or amazing. We're just trying to create something that looks nice, good, and we understand the composition, the colors, all that stuff. So I think we're done with this layer for now. Let's go ahead and let's close it. So that's all on one layer, as you can see now. Next, let's go ahead and move on to the second mountain. So we'll come onto this layer, add a new layer, create a clipping layer mask. And now we can start painting this one. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start with the under rocks. So I'm just going to select one of these colors. Make sure you're on your paintbrush. And let's select something with some texture. So I'm going to go back to my watercolor brush. I'm just going to kind of start painting in what I see. So if it comes straight down to there, kind of get this little thing going on here. And then we get this whole sort of landslide area right here. Maybe I'll color pick that color just to make sure I'm using a good color for it. Kind of darkened it up a bit. Go ahead and select that right there. So you can see that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look exactly like the photograph. You just need to kind of represent those rocks and forms in there. This part just kind of runs in front right here. We can kind of blend these in a little bit as well. All right, and then we can go ahead and take our eraser and just kind of erase out some texture. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it. So if I come in here, I can rotate my brush. You can see down here it'll rotate. So actually, let's try flipping it. So I'm gonna flip it on the x-axis, so it's just kind of in the other direction and kind of moving. The texture is kind of moving more with the mountain. Bring that size up. Then I'll switch over to something more like this hard round brush. And I'll just kind of erase out some more of these shapes so I get something looking more like what I want. Let's try another brush. Get a little bit more texture in there. See what that is. Could try something like that. You want to try all different types of brushes when you're trying to get texture into your paintings. Sometimes brushes that you would never think would look good can create some really interesting textures. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer, drag it above. We want this snow layer to be on top. And then I'm going to go ahead and start painting the snow. So I'll select the color of the snow, and just like we did before, let's use a hard round brush, and we'll go ahead and paint that in. All right, great, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to my erase tool, bring down my brush size, and now I can just go ahead, and actually we don't want to erase it out, we want to do what we did before where we made a layer mask for this. So this isn't a clipping layer mask, this is just a layer mask on this actual layer. So that allows us to paint with white, which will basically erase it out, but we can paint with black and it'll bring it back. So we don't completely lose what we painted. And I want to get a different brush, hard round, with pressure opacity or pressure sensitivity. And I'm just looking up at my reference, seeing what it looks like. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, I'm not really liking this background area, the rock area, so I'm going to come back into my rock area, and I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit. I'm going to paint some more in there. Let's try a few different things. Grab some more gray right there. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to come down to my color layer, and I'm going to add a new layer above that. So I'm going to kind of change the color on this background area. So I'm going to go ahead and select this lighter blue right there. I can bring my brush size up, and I'm going to kind of paint that in because I think the shadows on this part of the mountain need to be a little bit more lightened. Like that. That looks pretty good. And then I can go ahead and select this dark color and kind of paint that back in right there. I'll keep that area dark. I'm also going to go ahead and come to this layer. I need to kind of shape that out a little bit more and give it a harder edge and a darker edge. Just something like that. And I can go ahead and select this color and then paint that in. Just like that. I'm going to erase out some sort of round shapes too, just to kind of signify some bushes or something out there. We don't even have to paint them in, we can just use the blue color because the further away things get, the more blue they look. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab some sort of a textured brush or something. Let's see. That might look good. And I'm just going to kind of add some texture to that by erasing it out. Great, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and see what happens if I bring down the opacity on my snow and see how that looks. I won't bring it down too much, maybe to 90 or something like that. I can even add a layer above this. I'll actually drag it below so it still stays a clipping layer mask, and I can do another layer. This will be kind of a test layer. I'll see how it looks. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some more painting and highlight and stuff onto this background mountain range. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. I think this layer is pretty much done. Maybe we could darken in this area right here a little bit more. So I'll select this dark blue color, come down to my layer where I was kind of playing around with my background color. And I'm going to fill this in darker right there. Like that. Probably make it a little bit darker down here as well. Alright, great. That's looking pretty good. Lastly, let's go ahead and let's just add some splatter paint effect to it. So I'm going to create a new layer, make sure it's a clipping layer mask. Come to my brushes, and let's just select one of these speckle brushes. Oops, that's a little bit too big. Bring that brush size down. Just paint a few speckles in there like that. Oops, those are really big, so I'm going to undo those. Oops. Just paint a few speckles in. Maybe I could try another color like this brown color. Paint a few of those in. Just to add some detail and texture in there. I could also actually come to this snow layer. I forgot to give it a little bit more texture, so I'm going to come to that and use my erase tool. I could erase out just some of the snow and give it a little bit more texture. Alright, great. That's looking pretty good. And then coming back up to my speckle texture, I'm going to go ahead and just bring down those speckles a little bit, just so it adds a hint of texture. We don't want it to overwhelm the painting. Alright, that's looking pretty good. And maybe we could actually touch this layer up a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and select this color, because I'm looking up here and it has some pretty light areas where you can see the mountains pretty well. So I want to make sure that I just really kind of capture that. Let me switch brushes. Just kind of repaint that in a little bit more. And then back here we get this light area that we kind of lost. So I'm going to paint that back in as well. Alright, but that's pretty good. It just kind of gives you the idea of this mountain and the snow and the texture, which is what we're looking for. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the next layer. So I'm going to go ahead and close that folder and then come to my Hills folder, add a new layer, and turn that into a clipping layer mask. And then we're going to go ahead and start painting in there. So all we have to do is let's just select this lighter color out here, and I'm just going to start painting in highlights like this. I'm just looking back at my reference to make sure that I'm painting it pretty close to what I see and what's in the reference. And I think just for simplicity's sakes, I'm just going to leave this river out. But don't forget, just keep everything nice and loose. As you go along, you'll get better at tightening your paintings up and stuff. But the worst thing I would want you to do is just be really tight with your paint strokes, and be really focused on all the tiny little details and stuff. What I really want you to do is I want you to just be focused on painting loose. And just remembering that you can always undo things because you're working digitally. And not only that, but you can do things you can't do in real life with paint, such as what we did with the snow where we could erase it away and then draw it back in. We can do stuff like that on a layer. So just don't get too worried about how your painting is going. Just take it slow. Just take it one part at a time and focus it on one part at a time. Alright, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and maybe add a little bit more texture out here on these hills. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this lighter color right here. And we can kind of paint in a little bit more of a lighter color out here on these hills. I'm going to switch to a different brush because I'm having a hard time with this one. So let's try painter style. Let's see what that looks like. That's okay. Maybe I'll switch back to that brush. Maybe I'll try texture brush. I'm going to give a nice edge to that hill out there because I want there to be a difference between the background mountains and this hill. right, now I'm gonna go ahead and take my eraser. I'm just gonna kind of erase myself out some texture. Let's try some other textures, see if we can find something better. That's kind of a cool texture, and it rotates automatically for us, so I'm going to try that texture right there. And then I can just grab something like a hard-edged brush with a taper. I can just kind of shape some of this out a little bit more. Alright, great. Now I'm going to go ahead. I think I need to actually darken this color up here a little bit more. So I'm going to select the color that I see on this hill and just kind of color this in with that color. Try selecting a different color, a little bit more of a muted color. See how that looks. Looks pretty good. I'm going to switch over to a hard edge, more of a hard edge brush, such as this textured paintbrush, because I feel like this soft edge isn't looking very good. So I want to give it a little bit more of a hard edge to my paint strokes. Alright, great. I'm going to go ahead and use my eraser now. Maybe erase a little bit more of this out. I'm also going to go ahead, I'm going to select one of these darker colors in here. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to use this as my color adjustment layer so I can adjust the shadow colors. So I'm going to try painting that in and see how that looks. I'm going to go for a lighter color. So I'll just keep picking until I find a color that I like. Maybe I'll brighten that up a little bit. Let's switch to our brush tool, then we'll actually be able to see it. So let me reselect a color, see how that looks. Yeah, that looks kind of good. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my brush size up. I'm just going to paint in this area of the hill with that color. Select this mixed color right here. Just paint that in. Some of it out there as well, maybe a little bit up there. Alright, now I think actually up here we want this to stay pretty dark. So I'm going to paint some of that back in dark. Alright, and then I think we can go ahead and come up to this layer, and I'm going to erase out some of this and thin out kind of these highlighted edges a little bit more. That. Alright, great. So I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and kind of soften all this up over here a little bit more. Alright, next let's go ahead and let's start adding in some grass. So let's figure out how we're going to do this. There's a few ways we could do this. I'm going to add a new layer, and this does not have to be a clipping layer mask necessarily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and you should be able to find a brush that looks like grass. A lot of brush sets will have that. If you have this exact same brush set that I'm using, then you'll find it. I mean, you can even see that we have brushes that can create sort of fern-like plants and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool brushes in here. We have tree brushes. Let's look for something that would work as grass. Let's try the shrubbery. Yeah, I like that. That's what we're looking for, is right there, that shrubbery. All right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start furthest back. So I'm gonna go ahead and select this light color back here, and we're just gonna start painting that in. So bring your brush size down because these are gonna be really small shrubbery. And this is basically gonna start back here on a hill, kind of moving upwards like this. And because of the spacing on a brush like this, you can actually just kind of paint that in real quick across, like as if you're painting a line. And you can see that just kind of automatically starts adding in some nice shrubbery. And make sure that you don't use the same color the whole time. Choose a few other colors out there. See how they look. Let's go ahead and try another color. So maybe something more like that. Let's go ahead and try selecting one of these darker colors. Alright, we can start bringing our brush size up now and get some larger shrubbery in there. Go ahead and select a different color now. You can see very quickly with a brush like this, you can start to get the look of actual grass and plants. I'm going to bring my brush size up. Now we can start adding some plants that are even closer. Go ahead and select some of these other colors, so maybe kind of that brownish green color. Maybe some of these darker colors as well. And we just want to keep layering these in. Go ahead and select some of this color out here. We can add a bunch of shrubbery out here along this edge, maybe along the top of this mountain. Let's try a few other brushes so we don't just have all the same brushes in here. So maybe we could try, see what the leaf brush looks like. The leaf brush might give us a little bit of interesting texture in there. All right, let's see what else we have. Let's see. We could try some of these fern plants, see how those look. We want to add that. I know they're not in the photograph, but it might just add a little bit more interest to our drawing if we add those in. Try shrubs. That's what we're just on. Let's try foliage. That kind of gives us some interesting leaf effects. Go ahead and select sort of this green color. We can add some of that in there. I'm going to go ahead and layer in some more shrubbery over top of that texture, just so, because it kind of looks like it's just floating there. Select this really light shrubbery and add a lot of that in there. Alright, great. Now, the shrubbery kind of has a soft edge to it, and I'm not a huge fan of that. So I'm going to come down to my color layer for my hills, and I'm going to paint in with a different brush. So I'm going to switch to something like let's go something like this watercolor brush. And I can just kind of paint that background in a little bit and kind of get rid of that blotchy looking effect. So I'm going to select a color I like. I can kind of fill in those gaps back there a little bit, kind of bring it all together. Alright, this looks pretty good. Now another thing I can do is I can go ahead and add a layer above all my layers. I can select some of these colors in here and switch into a brush. Let's switch to something with a taper. I can actually hand paint some of my own little grass pieces like that. That will kind of be in front of that walkway. I can also draw some of my own in there just so this isn't so monotonous. We can have some that kind of curve over and stuff like that if we want. So any areas that look kind of weird or blotchy to you, this is a good way to go in there and manually just paint it in by hand and get the look that you're looking for. Sometimes painting with stamp brushes isn't enough, and you really just got to go in there and get it done yourself. That looks pretty good. Out here is still kind of looking weird to me, so I'm going to see if I can fix that. So let's go to our shrubbery layer. I think that's might be where it's looking kind of weird to me. So I'm going to erase some of the shrubbery out here. Oops, we're on the wrong layer. So I'm going to erase some of that out, because it's making it look a little bit soft and fuzzy, and I don't really like that look. So what I will do is I'll come back out to this layer. I'm just going to paint in a little bit more detail out here to kind of give a little bit more of a hard edge to my detail. Maybe I'll come up to my shrubbery and I'm going to erase some of this weird green texture out. I think that looks kind of weird. I'll come back down here. Maybe actually I'll come to my color layer. I'll just kind of paint this area in dark. Like that. Alright, great. And then if we wanted to, we could come to our walkway layer. We could leave it the way it is, or if we wanted to, we could create a clipping layer mask for that. We could select or create a darker version of it, of the color. I'm going to leave a little bit right there to be light so I can come back and color pick that. Go ahead and color pick that. Bring our brush size down. And now what we can do is we can just kind of paint in some of these wooden slats and stuff, or at least just give the idea of them. Just do it nice and quick. Doesn't have to take a long time or anything like that. So the way I'll do that is I'm just going to draw straight lines coming across like this. It's nice and easy. And if they're not all evenly spaced, it's totally fine. It's just to give the idea that there's some wooden slats out there. Bring my brush size down as I go back further and further. Until I get way back here, and then it can just all basically go into white. Alright, great. And then if we wanted to, we could even add a layer beneath it. So I'll drag this layer beneath our walkway layer, and I can select a color like this right there, and just kind of paint in the edge of that walkway. That might be a little bit too dark. Let me find a lighter color. Something like that. Looks good. Alright, great. So there we go. That looks pretty good. Is a little bit rushed just because I don't want to keep you guys here forever. You should get the gist of how you would do this, but I want you to understand that the more time you take to do your paintings, usually the better it's going to come out. So make sure that you really take your time. I did this painting earlier before as a test, so I'll just share that one with you as well. So you can see that they're pretty similar. There's good and bad things about each one. But if you really take your time, you can get it looking really good. But once you have your painting done, you can go ahead and crop it. So if you crop it, it should snap right to the bottom of our reference photo, like that. Go ahead and enter. And now we have that image cropped, and we have this beautiful landscape painting. Let's go ahead and do the same thing to the other one. I think the contrast in this one just looks a little bit better. I have a lot less detail out here, so you can see that it looks like I just painted some really solid colors out here and up here. So I kept this one actually pretty simple. So maybe when you do yours, if you're not following along yet, go ahead and just paint yours a little bit more simple than this one. I think I overworked this one a little bit, which is a good lesson in overworking your paintings. You don't want to overwork your paintings. The simpler and the less brush strokes you have to do to create that image, the better. Because one, it's going to be quicker, but two, it's going to look better. It's going to look more like your strokes were meant to be. So I think the foreground of this one looks a lot better, but I would say the mountains in this one look better. It's up to you, you choose. But so go ahead and paint this painting, and you can change some things about it, the composition, whatever you want. But when you're done, go ahead and post that to the Q&A section of the course so we can all see it, because I love seeing your guys' progress. I love seeing the work you guys are creating. It really gives me a lot of joy and purpose in being an art teacher. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.